And here we have the first launch in the park. I'd only used this a couple of times for maybe 5 minutes in the backyard, so I really didn't know how to use the app very much at this time. And I was just trying to find the button so that I could lock it on to us and start going. I had the idea that we would ride these scooters through the park and the Skydio would follow us. Actually, originally I thought I had the idea that I would ride them down the street and it would follow us, but we have a lot of power lines in the area, and I knew that it wasn't safe to fly it around power lines. But here you can see I've enabled the motion tracking mode, and I told it to track my front left. So you can see once I start moving and it figures out which direction I'm going, it will fly over and try to stay approximately in that sort of front left position, and does a pretty good job avoiding trees and other obstacles. So having gotten that, I think I was playing around here with this control. This thing is called the Beacon. It's a little handheld remote control that has a screen and some buttons and a GPS so that it can track you even if it can't see you. And I wanted to do some different modes with it, but at this point I was having trouble controlling it, and we realized this wasn't a good place to start, so I figured I would just land it and do another video. So here is catching it in the air as it's landing. So having had that very brief practice run there, I decided I would start it and just get going. We were running out of time. It gets dark early these days, so I really just wanted to try this thing out. So I've set it up and put it in that same tracking mode, asked it to follow me. It's not really follow, I guess it's leading sort of from the front left. And after I sort out stowing all the things I'm trying to hold and then realizing that my scooter had turned itself off and I needed to power it back on, then we'll get going here in a minute. So this thing is not meant to be used around, like I said, power lines and also branches with trees with thin branches. And as you can see in the autumn here, we have quite a few of those. So that's a bit of a premonition of things to come. But here I start off riding, and you can see the Skydio is tracking quite nicely. And when it gets to a tree that it has to skirt around, it does so. This is a tree-lined path here, so it's almost the worst possible place I could have set this up, because as it's trying to maintain this path in front of me, it's constantly dealing with obstacles as there's a line of trees right in the way where it would have to go. So it's either too close to me here and having to keep dodging these trees, or in a moment I realize there's a button I can press and I can tell it to go further away, at which point you'll see here it zooms back. And so while this is kind of artistic as things pass between me and the drone, it also means that the view is constantly being occluded, and it has to deal with that as well. So again, some of those thin branches here. I mean, I really like the way this looks, but it is definitely a challenging tracking situation. And in a moment we hit the challenge with the tracking where it loses sight of me and decides that it can't follow any longer. What's kind of cool is on the what's that thing called, the beacon that I'm holding, it actually goes beep and says subject tracking lost. So that's why I stopped here, and it'll just hover in place behind this tree where it last saw me. And I thought I could just come back, and as soon as I got in its field of view, I thought it would resume following me again. So it took me a moment to realize that I had to press the button to restart it. And once I do that, it will begin following me again. Now you might be looking at this and going, well, why couldn't it have just ducked under some of these things? It's not actually able to do that because it has a height floor setting that I enabled for safety, which means that it won't go lower than 8 feet off the ground. With other people around in the park and things, it's a little bit safer to ensure that it doesn't swoop down low. So it hit this situation here, And once I take off here, you'll see that it struggles to get around this tree, and it kind of refuses to go any lower. So it actually popped up a message on the thing as well that said, essentially, I'm stuck. I can't go lower, and I can't get around this thing. So then I came back and I rescued it. So again, you can turn that height floor off, and it has a lot more options for how it can avoid obstacles, but it might get quite close to the ground, and you don't want to do that if there's cars or people. There we go. So now it's gotten itself out of trouble, at least for the moment. Now what's going to be coming up here, unfortunately, is a crash. And you won't see the crash because the last few seconds of video is not saved when it runs into something. So unfortunately, as I come around here, just after this point, it sort of zooms in front of me and then runs right into some tree branches with no leaves on them, and it didn't spot them, so it crashed and hit the ground. So we're going to see in this last clip here of the attempted scooter ride video, I relaunched the thing, and one of the problems I had here was every time I tried to do something, even though there are very few people in this park, someone would come along at just the wrong moment. So I'd have the thing all set to launch, and it'd be on the path there, and then someone would come walking by, and I'd move it aside and wait for them. And they always walk really, really slowly too. So unfortunately, that guy just showed up after I was a little too late. So I changed the mode here to track behind me. I thought this would be better because instead of trying to be off to the side, it could just follow the middle of the path and just that way avoid the trees entirely. But at about this point, I realized that this was just a bad idea. You can see these trees coming up in front of me here, and I just did not want to get entangled with that. Again, remember, I had just crashed this thing, so the last thing I wanted to do was crash it again and actually break it. So at this point, I gave up on my plan to ride scooters around and have this thing doing loops and following us, and I figured we'd just take it to an open field and try it out that way, and it would be a little bit safer. So here we come in for a landing, and I think once again I used the method of plucking it out of the air, which is really kind of easy to do. So next we'll be in the field, which is the rest of this video here, and I'm going to include a bunch of this just for purpose of illustration, but it's drone footage from somebody who just got their drone, and I suspect that everybody who just got a drone has a whole bunch of this kind of stuff. There's nothing particularly exciting about it. I'm learning to fly and experimenting with the controls, but in this case I have that beacon still, and I wanted to try out a feature where you can fly the thing around by sort of dragging and dropping it, which is a really interesting ability that this has, where you see I'm holding this sort of a wand, and you hold down the button and you just slide it over to somewhere else, and it will go almost like you're using a mouse. So I think that's what's coming up here. I'm just going to see if I can make it go to the side, and you see it follows where I'm pointing, which is pretty nifty. Now, you might notice here that I was so excited to try this thing out, I didn't bother to take off my helmet or my face mask, so I don't think it's necessary to wear a helmet while flying a drone, but at least for this shot, I'm still wearing the helmet. And so here I press the go further away button to see what would happen. Very timid pilot at this point, and I think I still am a very timid pilot. So as soon as that thing started to get up into the air fairly high, I started getting nervous, and I pushed the other button to bring it back closer. I mean, I know that's nothing in terms of altitude, and it's probably safer to be higher because there are a few things to run into, but I'm just learning my way around it here. So figured I'd walk out there and point it in a slightly different direction and see if I can swing it around with that remote. That is a really interesting way of driving it effectively. And I think the other thing here is it's set to a tracking mode where it just keeps the camera pointed at me. So the drone will move around, but it's not going to follow me unless I'm moving it manually. If I don't do any inputs, it'll just stay in one place. But if I walk around, the camera, it'll turn to follow me in place, is what I'm saying. So I finished with that remote, and I thought, well, you can see the sun's getting lower and lower, the shadows are getting longer. I'm not sure if the glare from the sun would even, would potentially cause some problems. So I figured I better land it at this point. And I wanted to try landing it on the case. There's a case landing feature where it can detect the picture on the case and land on it. But I was, again, inexperienced and incompetent here. So I was just trying to park it over top of the case and then hit the land button. And I really didn't understand how that works. So I could have pointed the camera down and well, I guess I couldn't here because I didn't have a screen, but there you can see it ignores the case and lands in the grass. So relatively okay though. So now we come to this point where I attach the controller. So in addition to the beacon, there's essentially three ways you can, or three control devices you can use. You can just use your phone, which works reasonably well. And again, if you're using it autonomously, which is 90% of the drive to have this thing, I think you really just use the phone to get it started and tell it to start tracking, and then you can put the phone away and go do your extreme sports or whatever. So there's the option to use the phone. Then there's the beacon like I had there. I think the beacon's a useful accessory because it adds that GPS tracking feature. If you don't have that, then you're relying entirely on the visual system. And if you get separated from the drone, it's going to not be able to track you. Whereas if you have the beacon, I think the idea is that it'll go find you from the GPS signal. So the third one is what I'm doing here, which is the sort of more traditional controller. So I've attached it's got the controller with the two sticks and things that you slot your phone into. And so in this one, I'm flying it manually using the controller. And this is my first time ever having this thing kind of high up in the air. I had only previously tried it out in the backyard for 5 minutes and sort of briefly put it over the house, got nervous, and then landed it. So here I put it reasonably high up, and I decided to just do a little circle here. Thought that was a nice view of the fields in the park. Of course, this altitude is nothing for a drone, and again, super timid as a pilot here in my first run. And I kind of, as it got smaller and smaller in the sky and harder to see, instead of recognizing that I have the phone screen and I can see what's going on and I can, it'll safely return home to me when needed, I was just sort of getting a little panicky, and I was like, well, I don't want to go any higher than that right now. So at the moment, I'm just doing a little loop, and I wanted to show Amy. She had not seen when I passed by that field there the first time, so I figured we'd see it again on the way back. Get a nice shot of this area. You can see when the sun kind of gets in its camera. And then I wanted to do a sideways movement, but again, it's one of those things where I think you have to fly for a while to get used to the controls, and sort of remembering which stick does what was not coming naturally to me at this point. So again, I've seen very similar drone footage from other people when they first get the thing. It's not the most exciting because you can tell everything's very mechanical and slow, and they only move in one axis at a time. But as I started to get the hang of things and decided to get a little more brave, we get some better footage here. I also had the controls set to pretty much as slow. Well, they were set to the defaults, so you can adjust the sensitivity so that you can go a lot faster. I think if I gave the thing full throttle on the stick here, it's probably half of what it's capable of if you unlock that. But even then, I was hesitant to push those buttons. But you can see I finally thought to take the helmet off. In a few years, we're going to look back on this stuff and be like, God, that was the time we went a year with no haircut. So here I thought, let's do a droney. I only learned this word a couple days ago. It's an incredibly irritating word, but I guess that's the word for standard drone selfie type shot. So I realized we were standing there with the sun at our backs and in the dark. So we decided to go stand in the sun and squint and then have this thing press the automatic droney button. This is how badly I'm flying it at this point. Just completely unable to get it oriented so it comes toward us. I know it doesn't look like it in the video here. It's kind of intimidating to have this thing flying at you. It moves faster in real life than you might expect. So once I got it lined up and I set it to tracking, and then you press the droney button and it gives you a 3-second countdown. And then we kind of didn't know what to do with ourselves, so we just stood there. And it does this ascent and descent. Of course, as soon as I saw this thing, I thought, well, gee, that would be great if we had a group of people over and we had a party and we could get a nice little clip of all of us. And of course, we can't have parties and we can't have people over. So we will, hopefully this thing will still work when the world resumes, if the world resumes. So that was our droney, and then I wanted to press the rocket button just to see what would happen. I mean, I know it goes straight up, and that's what it does, and tilts down while it's doing it. But I don't know if you can change the speed of any of these kind of built-in trick things. But at that point, I decided rather than continue to try all of those buttons, we were running short of time. We had to do some other things before sundown, and it was getting really hard to see anything. So I said, just let me get one more shot here, and this is kind of where I finally got something that was drone-worthy. I thought, I came all this way, and who knows, the weather might turn and I might not get another chance all winter, so I really should fly this thing like I mean it. And I think this is the point here where we go up into the air a bit more. One thing this doesn't appear to have is telemetry. Maybe it does, I haven't really checked, but it would be nice if I had some data, that I could overlay with like height and stuff like that. I know it knows, I'm just not sure if it records it to a file that I can access. So I don't know exactly how high I went here. It was probably, again, nothing compared to what its capabilities are and what most drones can do, but it was very different than what I had done to this date. So once I got up there and I was like, oh look, you can see over the trees and you can see the city. That's kind of cool. And of course I realized I was panning way too quickly, but in my excitement and inexperience with the controls, it's basically I just did a couple of circles here. So kind of a nice view. You can see Hicksville and the mall in the distance, and then come around and you can see Westbury. Newcastle over here. And the park in general. So there, I managed to get kind of a classic drone aerial view after all, and then just came back down for a landing, and that was my first day of trying to use the Skydio. I had done something the other day. It was in the backyard, and our backyard is very small, so when I put it in tracking in order to try to follow me, it quickly zoomed over the fence and it was hovering in the neighbor's yard, looking back at me, but it was, it was off our property and I didn't want that. So I figured the quickest way to get it back was to press the home button. And when I hit that, it flew back and, not to exactly where I was. So I was thinking when it was up in the air, I could press home to try to get it back to me, but then who knows, right? It might land in the football field. So here I am actually properly executing the case landing. The right thing to do is to get some altitude and tilt it down so it can see the case. And then when you land, it'll just automatically lock onto it and do its thing. So that is it. So I didn't even take the tag off the case yet.